Hi there, and welcome to show number 2 of the guitar class. Last week we looked at some open chords, a G major chord, and a C major chord, and a D major chord. And we talked a bit about different sort of strumming techniques and stuff like that, just touched on them. Today I want to show you a few more open chords, and maybe play a short little part out of an AC/DC tune to make you think about it. So I guess you'll have to think back to those chord diagrams that we talked about last week, and if you didn't see it last week, I'm sure we can shoot up to them again and I can quickly explain it. But like I mentioned, if you would like, you can send me a self-addressed stamped envelope to the address at the end of the show, and I'll send you out the 12 lessons on paper so that when you watch these you can keep in touch with what I'm doing and you won't have to be writing stuff down if you're into that. So that'll be flashed at the credits at the end of the show. So today I want to show you an E major chord and an A major chord and a B dominant 7 chord. The E major chord is an open chord, meaning that it contains open strings. And the way you're going to play it is to play the low E string open with no finger on it, and the A string gets played with your ring finger on the second note. That's a B. And the D string is on the second fret with your pinky finger, and the G string gets played with your middle finger on the first fret, and the other 2 strings are left open, and the chord should sound. That's an E major chord. The A major chord, there's a couple different ways to play it. What you want to do is to fret the D, G, and B strings all on the same fret, all on the second string, or on the second fret. And instead of using each one of your fingers to do it, it's better to use one finger to press all of them down at one time. And you can either use your index finger or your ring finger. And you'll change this relative to the chords that you played previous to it and the chords that you're going to play after it. I'll give you an example after we look at how to play it. For the A major chord, the E string doesn't want to be played at all, so you're going to reach your thumb up and mute it. And the A string should be played open, and the D string should be played on the second fret with your index finger, and the G string at the second fret with your index finger, and the B string at the second fret with your index finger, and the high E string should just be muted. And that's how you play that chord with your index finger. And you're muting this low string again to enable you to play all the strings, but not have to worry about missing that E string, because it shouldn't be in the chord, you're just deadening it. The other way to play this chord is to, instead of using your index finger, use your ring finger and mute that high string and put your thumb over to mute that low E string again. It's a good idea when you're playing with your ring finger to use both of these fingers for extra strength. Your ring finger tends to be a bit weaker than your index finger does. You'll use this form of the A major chord when you're going to be switching from an A to an E, like that. It's a lot easier. You'll use this form of an A major chord if you want to be reaching up and grabbing this G note right here. It's just whatever's the easiest for you. And the last chord we want to look at was a B dominant 7 chord. It's a real bluesy kind of sounding chord, and it's a little contorted. You have to use every one of your fingers. So I guess the best way to mute the E string on this chord is to take your middle finger, the very tip of your middle finger, and touch the low E string. Fret the A string on the second fret more with that part of your finger, and put your index finger on the first fret of the D string and your ring finger on the second fret of the G string, the B string is played open, and it might be a sort of a tight kind of squeeze to get your hand around that, because your ring finger tends to want to do that to it. So you have to bend your hand around a little bit. And the high E string gets fretted on the 2nd fret with your pinky. It's important to keep that E out of there. Kind of makes things sound a little bit ugly. Excuse me. Maybe what we can do is just have a look at a short little progression using those 3 chords. It'll be the same progression as we looked at last week. The E chord, the A chord, and the B dominant 7 chord all relate to one another, like the G chord, the C chord, and the D chord do. So last week we played G 8 times, C 4 times, D 4 times, C 4 times, G 4 times, and D 4 times, and then back to G. This time we're going to play E, A, and B dominant 7 in the same pattern. And this is still a 1-4-5 pattern. So maybe I'll just run through it for you real slow. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then it starts all over again. And that's the same relationship from chord to chord as the progression we did last week using the G and C and D. And it's important to see that no matter how many chords you know, a lot of the songs that you might learn or listen to have the same chord progression, even though the chords may be of overall a higher pitch or a lower pitch, meaning that they're in a different key. The way the chords sound relative to one another is very similar. Like blues tunes in the key of G that's exactly the same chord progression as it's just that all of the notes in the whole progression are overall at a lower pitch. If we take that progression that I just showed you with E, A, and B dominant 7 and play it with just downstrokes, it tends to sound a little sleepy and you'll get real tired of playing it real quick. So what we should do is something that I touched on last week, which was to add upstrokes in between your downstrokes. You can keep it at the same tempo and replace one of your downstrokes with an upstroke by playing, instead of playing, you can play. And the reason this changes the feel of the song so much is that when you play a downstroke, the first note that you hit is the lowest note of the chord. And when you play an upstroke, the first note that you hit is the highest note of the chord. Upstrokes tend to be a little more bitey, because you hear the high strings more than you hear the low strings. And downstrokes tend to be a little more powerful sounding, because you hear the lower notes more than the higher notes. So when you use the two in conjunction with one another, it adds some texture to what you're doing. And it's important, especially with a song that has chord progression like this, which is fairly simple, only 3 chords, and you're just moving back and forth between them, to keep it rhythmically interesting so the loser doesn't start wandering off. So I'll play it once for you with a bit of a funkier kind of a feel with upstrokes. And there's no real definite pattern happening there. It's good to just pick any kind of a rhythm that you hear in your head. What you hear, the music that you hear inside your head, is the music that you're going to play the best. And that's what really learning to play an instrument is all about. It's not being able to play something exactly like it was written, or doing things exactly like your instructor tells you to do, or anything like that. It's to play what you want to play and the way you want to play it. If you hear kind of a funkier kind of feel in your head, just really let yourself relax. And you might not want to do it when somebody else is around, because it might be a little embarrassing if you blow it. But just play whatever you feel like, whatever kind of music you hear in your head. Even if you make a lot of mistakes while you're doing it, you have to work almost independently on tonality, being what note to play, and rhythm, being how you make things feel. And a good exercise to work on your rhythm is to just take a muted chord. Just take your hand and just drape it across all the strings so all the strings are dead. And just pick a pattern. You can start with just a downstroke. And add some kind of a little note, some kind of a little figure into it. And you're playing at the same tempo. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. You're just playing, you're playing on an offbeat, and you're adding a little upstroke in between it. And when you count that, which you should do, you should count 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and you don't have to put those between every single note. You can take a figure like that and play one and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and if you work at playing those kinds of things without having to worry about fretting the notes properly and playing the chords and having every note ring clearly and all that stuff, your right hand can develop, and you can concentrate more on the way your wrist is moving and your arm and your shoulder, and all those different points that affect the way a note sounds when the pick leaves it. When you play that stuff, you should try to keep a really loose wrist, and your wrist should almost fall, kind of like you're trying to shake water off your hands or something like that. And you should hold the pick in fairly close. And when you strum across the strings, you should feel the strings on your index finger first. And it gives you a real good idea about where the string is and when it's coming up. And the more you do it, you'll start getting used to that, scraping across your finger. It'll wear your index fingernail down to paper thin, but you start to get real accustomed to feeling the note, feeling the string before you actually hear the note. And that's real good. The more you get used to having the guitar in your hands, and the more little things like that you feel, even though you may not see them as getting you anywhere, every single thing that you do when you're playing, even if you sit and just have the guitar in your hands when you're watching television, will give you some more insight. Later on, after you've been playing for a while and you develop different types of styles and you can see which way you want to move musically, you'll look back and realize that a lot of the little unimportant things that you played really did shape the direction that you went. Well, enough of my rambling. I'll give you some stuff to play. If you take an E major chord, you can make it a little more interesting sounding by turning it from a major chord into a dominant 7 chord. And it's much more bluesy sounding. And all you have to do to form that chord is to play the standard E major chord and just take your pinky off and let that D string ring open, and you'll end up with You can do the same thing with an A major chord, turning it from a major chord into a dominant 7 chord. And what you have to do with that is, instead of playing all of those notes with one finger, you'll have to play the B string on the 2nd fret with your ring finger, and play the D string on the 2nd fret with your middle finger, and leave that G open. Instead of fretting it at the 2nd fret like you would have when you used one finger, drop it back 2 frets, and you'll get an A dominant 7 chord. And you'll find that both of those chords sound a little less country and a little more bluesy. If you ever go to Bud's, you'll see people playing these chords all the time. I'll take that same blues progression that I played before and play it using an E dominant 7 chord and an A dominant 7 chord and the B dominant 7 chord that we learned earlier this lesson. So here it goes. And you can replace, basically, this isn't real theoretically correct, but practically, if a chord calls for an E major chord and an A major chord and a B major chord, you can replace them with an E7 chord, an A7 chord, and a B7 chord. You can change the whole feel of a song by replacing the major chord with its dominant 7 chord. This is done in a lot of different types of music. In jazz, people will take a chord and play it basically to its maximum. They'll play 4 notes in the chord, and it'll be more complex, and it'll sound much more, much darker. And those chords played like a rock and roll player would play them. The chord ends up being much simpler, not as many notes in them, and it's a little easier for you to listen to. Country players tend to play a lot of major. It's real happy sounding. Not that all country music is real happy or anything, but and blues guys, like I said, will take the chord and play its dominant 7. So when you're using that 12-bar progression, try subbing some dominant 7 chords in when it calls for a major chord, or sub a major chord in when it calls for a dominant 7 chord, and just make sure to pay attention to what chord you're playing and how it sounds, and remember the names of them, and try to catalog those chords in your head. So when somebody says to you E dominant 7 chord, you think it's sort of a bluesy sounding thing. If somebody wants you to play me a blues tune, play them those 3 chords, E major, A major, and B dominant 7, and just sub dominants in, and they'll be amazed at you. Well, I'll show you a bit of a rock and roll kind of a thing with these chords, using an E major chord and a D major chord that we looked at last week. Maybe I'll show that to you for those of you who didn't see it last week. Send me a self-addressed stamped envelope, and I'll give you all of these things on paper. The address will come up at the end of the show. There's no charge for it. The D major chord is the D string open, the G string at the 2nd fret with your index finger, the B string on the 3rd fret with your ring finger, and the E string on the 2nd fret with your middle finger. And you don't play the low 2 notes. That's a D major chord. And you're going to play these chords E, D, A. And a distorted sound is what you sort of need to play it. And you're going to play the E once and mute it. When you mute a sound, mute a chord with a distorted sound, you tend to get those kind of things. those ringing kind of notes. What you want to do is try to mute it over a wide surface area on the string. If you mute the strings in 2 spots, you'll totally kill all of the notes, which is what you want to do here. But you're already using this hand to form the chord. So what you do is you bang this part of your right hand onto the strings, and at the same time you lift your fingers off that E major chord. Don't take them off the strings, just release them. And you'll still get some ring, but that'll be stopped by your right hand. So you're basically muting most of the strings in 2 spots, and that'll minimize that noise that's going to happen. So play that E major chord once hard, and then a D major chord. You just form it and play it downstroke, an upstroke, and a downstroke. So, and then an A major chord. And again, there's those 2 ways to play the A major chord, like that or like that. You may find one of the 2 ways more comfortable. Just use whichever one you like. It doesn't matter at all. And you're going to play that A major chord in the same pattern that you play the D major chord. That's a down, up, down. It's an AC/DC song, Back in Black. And those 3 chords together, played real hard and real grindy with a distorted sound like a rock and roll tune. And if you play them with a clean sound and a little lighter, they sound more folky or more country, something like that. I think maybe if you, until next week, if you work on trying to really focus your attention on your strumming, when you play that E major chord, lean into it hard from your shoulder. Really put up, and you should hear the strings. The harder you hit the guitar, generally, the better. When you're playing this kind of stuff, it puts some attitude in your playing, which is good. You don't want to sound mousy. You want to sound like you know what you're doing, even if you don't. It works for me. The D major chord, you might want to try to come in at the guitar at an angle like this, instead of picking straight up and down like that. When you do that, it's a little easier to aim at those 4 strings. In the A major chord, your fingers do a lot of control with this chord. You're going to have to mute that low E string with your thumb. I think you can just experiment the way you want to work around that chord. Sometimes it causes a bit of problems. It's tough fretting those 3 notes at one time with your ring finger. Well, I think that's all I have to say for this lesson. I think that should give you enough to work on. Think about that muted, and try to just make up some of your own rhythms. Pick these chords at random, whatever sound good to you. Play them one after another. Don't worry about if that's the way they're supposed to be played or if they could be played a better way. You're writing the song, and you get to do it. Again, I'll mention that if anyone's interested in getting copies of these lessons on paper, just send me a self-addressed stamped envelope to the address at the end on the credits, and I'll fire you out all 12 lessons. And that way you can sit at home with a piece of paper while I'm talking. Might help you catch on a little quicker. But thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in a week.